So a while ago, I shared some photos showing a recently completed project, a model windmill that I made completely from scratch. The response it gained was very positive. This was the first scratch build building I've ever made. Well, it kind of is. Technically my first real scratch build was the 4-row engine shed, which I've used in several videos. However, all that really involved was just getting a shoebox, painting it grey and cutting out entrances for shed berths. Of course, later on, I would make some changes. So yeah, technically that was the first, but it didn't really involve much, unlike the windmill. Since I took several photos during the project, I wanted to put together a little video showing the build process. How I used the lid of a tube and bits of cardboard and turned it into, well, this. So, let's get into it. The main building itself was a lid from a diffuser tube. I originally intended on using both of these as chimneys in different sizes, but then I took note of the lid's shape. It has an inner white tube that is taller than the lid to help properly connect it to the tube. When upside down, it made for an interesting shape, a shape that kind of reminded me of the general outline of a windmill. This got me thinking, what if I used this lid for just that? And so the entire idea sparked in my head, and the build began. The first thing to sort out was the roof. The top was completely hollow and had no flat surface, so I had to make one. Using the inner tube, I drew a circle into a piece of cardboard, and then cut it out with a knife. This was extremely tedious, and the end result was a little rough, but the little circle did fit the top perfectly. Then I glued the roof on. The glue I use is called Yoo-hoo, and one of its specific purposes is model building. I've pretty much used it for all the model building kits I have, a large portion of which are from Metcalfe. It can take a while to dry, but the wait is worth it, as it sticks together really well. So now that the roof was well and truly stuck on, came what at the time felt like a very daunting part, the sails. Using a ruler, I drew 4 rectangles into the cardboard and cut them out. These were easier to cut out than the roof, as it involved straight lines, but it still took a while to fully remove them from the main card. The rectangles were 3 inches long, and just under an inch in width. I originally thought of having them to be 4 inches, but it looked way too long, so I reduced it by 1 inch. So now I had my 4 sails. However, I needed to make something to connect them to, which could then be connected to the main building. I made a smaller circle and, once cut out, I attached the sails to it, and then attached them to the building. Unlike with the roof however, I actually blue tacked these together, as I wanted to see how it would look before gluing anything down. The end result, overall, looked pretty good to me, so I could now move on to the next step. So now that I had all my pieces, the next step was a simple one, painting. I decided to leave the inner white tube as it was, as I felt it looked fine and didn't require any paint over it. The bottom half, roof and small circular piece were painted in a dark brown, while the sails were just plain white. Both sides of the sails and circular piece were painted, as they would be visible from both sides. After all the paint dried, came a step that was actually pretty daunting, adding detailing to the sails. I grabbed a Sharpie and using a ruler, drew lines on the sails. I did 9 lines in total on both sides of each sail, resulting in 8 sets of 9 lines. This took an especially long time to complete, as I had to be careful when getting all lines the same length and same spacing. The end result wasn't perfect. It's okay as it is, mainly from a distance, but it isn't too hard to notice the sloppy bits. Once all lining was done, it was time to stick it all together. I first glued the sails to the circular piece, and then glued that to the main building. It took a while to line everything up, but it was all eventually stuck together, and once that was done, I was going to basically finish the project here. I felt it was pretty much complete, and I was happy with it. However, I decided to make one final addition, and that was the windows. I had this very thin piece of card that I felt was the right size to make these windows from. It is also quite bendy, making it more perfect for the non-flat surface that is the main building. With the ruler, I drew 2 squares into the card that were 2 centimeters long. Once cut out, I used the Sharpie to add window frames. Then I stuck them onto the building. It took a while, as I had to push them down to have them properly flat on the building, so they didn't stick out. And so, that step was done. And with the end of that step, came the end of this project. I never once thought I would find myself making a scratch build building, let alone a windmill. But here we are, and I'm really happy with the result. Of course it isn't perfect, the main thing being the cardboard parts, which are quite thick. But like I said at the beginning, this is my first real scratch build. And honestly, as a first, this came out far better than I expected. And one of the best things about this is, now that I finally have a windmill, I can finally recreate the classic intro from Thomas. Thank you for checking this video out. I hope you enjoyed this little process on how I took some random stuff and made a windmill out of it. If you have any questions regarding the windmill, or any general questions, comment below, and I'll answer them as best as I can. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.